2005 Chevy 1500 Z71 front wheel bearing replacement. I'm Brian Eslick from How To Automotive. I'm gonna walk you through that process. So we're gonna get started by getting the vehicle up in the air and getting the wheel off, whatever, if left or right, whatever side you're working on. I recommend, if you're doing this at home, floor jacks and jack stands. So our next step is we need to get this caliper and bracket off. So I'm gonna do this all as one assembly. So what I'm gonna do is on the back side, I'm gonna remove the two major main bolts to hold the bracket on. So there's one here, I believe it's an 18mm bolt here, and then one below. It's an 18mm. I'm gonna go ahead and remove that. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna slide the caliper off and kind of set it up on top of the upper control arm. Now that you've unbolted the caliper and the bracket all as one assembly, just set it up here like this. Now you can go ahead and remove your brake rotor. After removing the rotor, now you can pop the ABS wire out of its little clip here, follow it around the next little clip, pop it open with a little flat blade screwdriver, pop this one open with a flat blade screwdriver, and then unplug the sensor, which is right here behind all the wire, the brake line. So now that you got the ABS wires unplugged, we need to get this little dust cap off. And you could use like a little screwdriver or a punch or whatever and kind of put it in here and pop it open, or you may have to use a little hammer and give it a little tap to pop it open. Now with an impact gun, you can go ahead and remove the axle nut. Now that you got the axle nut and the little washer removed, on the back side of there's going to be three 15mm bolts here. So there's one here, and one on the opposite side of the axle over here. We're going to go ahead and remove those, and you may want to turn your wheel left or right, and also if you push the axle in, that gives you a little bit more access to get to these bolts. So go ahead and remove the 3 bolts. Now that you got the bolts out, I went ahead and sprayed mine with a little penetrating oil because this vehicle is kind of rusty. But after you get all the bolts out, then what you can do is you just smack the back of the hub here with a hammer, and it will separate here. And if yours is rusty, it may require a little bit of work to do it. But once you get it going free, it'll come off, and you want to make sure you don't let it just fall to the ground, because what it'll do is the backing plate most likely will come off with it, and it'll smash the backing plate. So you want to get it where you don't drop it. So, and if you're worried about it, you may even put the axle nut back on just a couple threads. So then that way you can smack it as hard as you want, and then when it pops off the hub, the axle will catch it. And if yours comes out rusty like this, then you can use sandpaper or whatever and clean the hub up, or a roll-lock disc or whatever, and kind of grind out some of the rust and make it smooth. That way the new bearing will slide right on. So now after you get the hub kind of cleaned up, I put a little penetrating oil on here and kind of worked it in here to help slide the new bearing together. So now what we need to do is we need to transfer our backing plate to our new bearing. So as you can see, the new bearing doesn't come with the backing plate, so I'm gonna go ahead and orientate this the way, pretty much the same way this bearing is with that bearing, and then switch over the backing plate, and you'll have to route the new ABS line will route through the center of the backing plate. So after getting my backing plate kind of transferred over, went ahead and slid it on, and then slid the bearing on. And what I did was stab the axle through the center of the hub and started the axle nut a few threads, and that way it's kind of holding. I have something to kind of hold everything in place while I maneuver it into place. And next we're going to do, before I put the bolts in, I'm going to put a little blue thread sealer or Loctite on these bolts. And here at the shop we like to use Permanex. It's kind of like Loctite, and it's like a little glue that goes on the bolts to help prevent them from vibrating loose. So back over here, I have the one bolt wouldn't come all the way out because it was going to hit the studs, but it unbolted completely from the bearing, so I left it in there. So I'm using that bolt to actually line up my my backing plate and hold it in place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift up the bearing and slide it into the hole, and I'm going to start the threads here first, and then I'm going to put the other 2 bolts in and start them. I'm going to make sure I got all 3 of the bolts started. And then what I'll do is I'll tighten it like a little bit on the top one, and I'll move to the bottom here on the right, and then a little bit on the left, and kind of draw it in equally. And then and then I'll draw it in till it's completely flush and bolted up. So after getting all 3 of the bolts drawn in and snug up, go ahead and torque them at 133 foot-pounds. Then after that, you can go ahead and put your axle, your washer and your axle nut on, and just run it down until it touches, and I'll show you how to torque that in just a second. After you get that done, then you can slip your rotor on. So after putting the rotor on, I want to use screw the lug nut on kind of backwards like this, and that holds it all flush and against the hub. That way it makes it easier for you to put the caliper on. So once you got that done, you can slip the caliper back on, and you're going to put that same thread sealer Loctite on these bolts that held the caliper on, and then you're going to torque these down to 74 foot-pounds. Also, when you slip this caliper back on, you want to make sure that the brake hose doesn't get twisted in the process. So after bolting the caliper back up, you got to be careful that the pads may fall out too when you're doing this. You kind of have to hold them, like put your fingers in from behind and kind of hold them in place as you slide it on. And if you're really struggling, you can't get it, then you may actually have to take the 2 caliper bolts off and bolt the bracket on, put the pads on, and then put the caliper back on. I was able to do it as one assembly, but if you're struggling with it, that's one way you can do it. So after you got them bolted up and torqued down to 74 foot-pounds, now you can go ahead and take your ABS sensor and reinstall it back into all its little clips and mounts like that, and plug it back in. Okay, after getting the ABS line and everything re-secured, if yours came with the new clips, I recommend you use them. Okay, so the next, after we get that done, we need to torque our axle nut. We need to torque the axle nut at 184 foot-pounds. It's very important that you torque it, because the squeezing action of the axle against the bearing is actually what kind of holds the bearing together, and if you don't torque it properly, it'll wear out prematurely. So the way I'm going to do this is I lowered the vehicle down, because I'm by myself, so I don't have a way to hold this axle and stuff. So what I did was I lowered it down, I put a couple lug nuts on the studs, and I put my long pry bar and wedged it in there, and now I set my torque wrench to 180 foot-pounds. Now I'm going to put my torque wrench on there, and I'm going to torque it down, and the pry bar wedged against it like that will hold it in place. And if you're afraid of anything, you can put more lug nuts on there or whatever, so it won't damage the threads. Now that you got your axle nut torqued, now you can go ahead and put the dust cap back on, take your lug nuts back off, and remount your wheel, torque your wheel down. And most likely it may have set an ABS code because of the wheel bearing being bad, so you may have to clear the code on it. And that pretty much completes the front wheel bearing hub assembly on a 2005 Chevy Z71 pickup with 4-wheel drive. I'm Brian Eslick from How To Automotive, and I'd like to thank you guys for watching my videos and encourage you to subscribe. Thank you again.